Okay.
Really quick question, possibly?
It doesn't have to be quick, you can
Okay,
ask.
but because we're going through accreditation and we have this new thing where we have to have restorative justice from those that are in our program, but I was just looking at that need for justice. That seems like there's going to be a conflict, and maybe just in my head, but I'm thinking, if I've lived with the need of justice and now you're telling me, or for revenge, now you're telling me I have to make a plan around restorative justice?
Well, I'm not a clinician, however, what I would suggest is that that would be an end result, not a starting point. So if someone is going through specific trauma-informed treatment, the goal would be that that is something that they could reach. They could meet that requirement at the end. It wouldn't be something right away. Okay. No, I think that speaks really important that when you look at your policies and procedures, that they do work together. You know, if you do want to bring, say, a trauma-informed continuum of care, that all of the programs in that understand what that means, that it's that event, the experience, the effect, that all of those are addressed. Otherwise, you'll have people who just won't be able to do it. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question. Well, and this is on, everybody's got one on the table. There's 5 or 6 at every table. This is the sequential intercept map of the criminal justice system. And the reason why I like to include these with the trauma training is this shows you, depicts for you the points where if you want to implement a change in the way people think, the way people respond, and what your policies and procedures are, all of these intercepts need to be touched and addressed. All of them. You may have the most trauma-informed treatment behavioral health system, but if your jail and your police aren't on board, you know, it's going to be an uphill battle. You're going to be undoing a lot each time you see somebody. So it's baby steps. Okay, your community might not be there yet, but this is really the take-home picture. People like this. This is our most sought-after, requested thing that we publish at the Gain Center, because it lets people. You can show this to anybody in the justice system and they get it. All of these points in time need to be touched. Everybody needs to be included at some point. And when we talk about delivering training, it should be across the continuum. It might be police, and then the courts, and then the jails, and then probation, and then reentry. But all have to be on board. And it's an undertaking for sure. It's an undertaking. But if you approach it that it's system-wide, not just your particular agency, I think you'll see that others get on board pretty quickly.
We've done it twice in Jacksonville. We did it in 2007, and we just recently went through another one. It's really interesting to see. We've come a long way since 2007, but we've still got such a long way to go. It is baby steps, and it's very hard to hit every intercept. It's extremely hard.
It is very hard, and it's also, as you say, I'm glad you said doing it multiple times. It's always checking back and making sure and seeing how you're doing, because people change. You may have a new chief of police, you've got a new sheriff running the jail differently, you've got someone, a new mayor. I mean, there's lots of changes. It's an ongoing process, an ongoing review.
I was the sole survivor from 2007. To the 2015, talking about how quickly a community changes.
Well, we don't hope that everybody leaves after they've had it. That's not the goal. Maybe people were so good at that some of them moved on to other jobs. But it's really important to keep this in mind when you're thinking about how you're going to plan to make changes in your community. It really is a system, and it's across the system. And it's to leave out one part is going to make more work for the rest of you. Okay, it's just going to. I mean, there are simple changes that can be made. Yes.
So we have something we call it focused deterrence, where we use data to identify ahead of time those people that produce the most harm to the community, and that includes homeless, mental health issues, and we've met with the courts, the probation, and we have dedicated officers that will actually guide them through the whole criminal justice system. And actually meet with the lawyers, meet with the defense attorneys to basically come up with a treatment plan for these offenders. We've had tremendous results with it.
Where are you from?
Cambridge, Mass.
Yeah. I think that kind of collaboration is I mean, it should be, I used the should word, I should say, it'd be an admirable goal for all the communities. And having the police involved is really key, because they're often the first responder for people in a drug crisis, people in a mental health crisis, people committing a crime, for people who are homeless.
We hired a full-time social worker that helps monitor, she does the treatment program along with the detectives, and it's really doing very well.
Good. Take that idea home. We just read a book, we have a book club at PRM. The book that we read was the Stories from the Shadows. It was the first physician, a paid physician for the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless. And it was stories about his experiences, and I kept picturing that as part of this sequential intercept and how everyone needed to be on board for it to work, to identify people at risk before they freeze to death or before they are going to jail, et cetera. And I mean, everybody, the healthcare, the police, outreach workers. It was a very visual book. I'd highly recommend it.
What was it called?
Stories
from the Shadows.
Stories from the
It's on
Shadows.
the bookshelf in that room.
Okay. Okay, so this next module, we're going to start talking about trauma-informed responses. And what I like for you, the way I like to frame this, and the conversation you can have with yourself, your colleagues, your friends, is think about your habits, and think about your policies, and think about the laws. It'd be a lofty goal to change the law, but you probably can't do that.
Think about your
Habits, your policies, and your laws. Habits you can change. You can change the way you greet people. You could change the way you expect people to be on time or what your first response is when someone's late. You can change the way you respond to someone who's relapsed again with a response something like, last time you only were able to go a week without using, this time it was 3 weeks. That's great. We're going in the right direction, instead of why'd you use again? I mean, that costs nothing to do that. So changing the way that your habits is maybe the hardest thing to do, because we don't like to really examine ourselves that closely. But policies are something you do in conjunction with the others you work with. And it may be for now just within your agency along that intercept. It may just be within your particular agency, but then branching out certainly in how that works across the sequential intercept. Or the continuum of mental health, behavioral health, physical health care. Pulling in the people from the emergency departments, they can tell you a lot. They can tell you an awful lot. So thinking about what policies you might have in place that maybe could use some tweaking around being trauma responsive. Your habits are something you're personally responsible for. The policies take a little bit more collaboration across the people who you work with. But when it comes down to it, people in the justice system and the behavioral health system really have pretty basic needs. Pretty basic needs. When we talk about risk, this is it. They need respect, they need information, they need safety, and they need choice. Not the choice, oh no, I'm not going to go to jail, I'm exercising my choice. But there's a way in which people can go to jail that's very traumatic or not. Some judges will let people turn themselves in because they have some business to take care of, like someone to take care of their kids or someone to pick their kids up from school or go to the daycare center. There are ways that you can, in very, very minute ways, demonstrate respect. Using someone's name. Showing up on time. You want them to show up on time? Show up on time. Ask people about, elicit some information about them. Show that you have some desire to know more about them. This is one of the unknown variables in treatment courts that everybody says the judge is key, but no one knows why. Really, nobody knows why. But you ask participants, they'll say the judge was the thing that got me, the person who got me to stay clean, the person who got me to meet my recovery goals. It's a really difficult concept to get your hand around and your head around, but we know we hear that constantly. They've never been treated that way by a judge before. Most of them have a pretty long experience with judges, by the time they get to a treatment court, but they've never been called by their first name, asked how their kids are, talk to them about their activities, ask them how their bowling match was last night. But treatment court judges do that. And that's just showing respect, the kinds of things we'd like people to know about us. Information. Any of you ever been to the doctor? Any of you ever been to the doctor and had no idea what they were talking about? And how did it make you feel? Lost, vulnerable, angry, not likely to go back to that doctor again, go doctor shopping now. Information, again, is free. This is what's going to happen next. Just explaining the situation. When you work in the criminal justice system, it's routine to you what happens next. You know what happens next. That isn't the case for someone, first of all, who's coming into maybe for the first time. They're scared to death. They may be high. And they don't really have any idea. They may not even speak the language that you're using. They don't have any idea what's going next. They don't know what all those acronyms are. And so it just exacerbates the fear. Give information. Simply give information. Not, I mean, there are ways, and we'll hear from Robert who in the video shortly about how a trauma-informed arrest might happen. But just saying, I have to handcuff you, and then we'll talk. Yeah.
This information, I work part-time for a hospital in Florida, and they have whenever I was rehired, they have a hospitality 4-hour block of hospitality for new hires. And it's exactly the same stuff, just basically you can apply this to the business world, to your life, your relationships with your spouse, your significant other. I mean, these are basic things. People need respect. They want to know, patients want to know, like you said with doctors, hey, what's happening now? What's happening next? I'm here. My name is Joe. I'm here to take you to a CT scan. That's where they're going to do this. Whatever your level of is, providing them that safety and choice. I mean, that's key in everything.
And even in situations that seem so lacking in choice, like being arrested, one police officer who's been through this training said, you know what? I let the people I'm transporting pick the radio station. What do I care? But it makes them feel they're at least choosing something.
Window up or down.
Yeah, things that are really, and it really empowers people. And there aren't a lot, and for many people, they haven't had a lot of choices in their life. And to be given, that's a sign of respect. And being culturally competent around that as well. That's really important, and making sure that how information is conveyed. To not have translators in a situation is really, really humiliating for people. And I know years ago I remember reading about a study that was done at a hospital where the translators became the children and grandchildren of the people who are, let's say, being arrested, going to court. Imagine, as a parent or grandparent, that your self-determination depends upon your grandchild providing you with that information. And some of it, I mean, there are so many levels, and depending upon the culture, that can be even more insulting. So having cultural competence about how respect and this information can be conveyed is really important as well. Safety, we've been talking about that quite a bit, and that's both emotional safety and physical safety. A lot of our situations in the criminal justice system, we expect people to tell us private information in front of a lot of people. HIPAA doesn't apply in the jail in the same way. And so people are expected to convey information that is private. And then there is really private information that can sometimes be intentionally or mistakenly divulged as well. I was observing a mental health court not in any state that anybody here is from, as far as I know. And the judge was very well intended, nice man. You'd sit down with him and you're like, yeah, he's a really nice man. But he badgered one of his participants in front of everybody, including us, who were the visitors, to essentially divulge that he was HIV positive in front of everybody. And that just is, was that the only time anything like that has ever happened in court? Absolutely not. Because people are often asked to divulge private information. So that's very emotionally unsafe. And then, as we talked about, choice. Where you can give choice. There can be small choices. Like you said, what radio station, windows up or down. All of those kinds of opportunities exist in the justice system. The behaviors that you're thinking about, the behavior, it's purposeful. behavior is purposeful. Okay, it's working. It's worked for me up until this point, it's kept me safe. You gotta tell me why it's not gonna work anymore, because I need to feel safe. So behavior is purposeful. It should be behavior is a symptom of what's going on, and you need to become really brilliant at understanding what these behaviors might mean. And you may know the person well enough to know they keep coming back and they keep coming back. You know what their backstory is. But you also have to help others understand that too, that, oh, she just needs to vent for a while and then we can talk. But if the wrong person catches that person coming in, that opportunity to vent may never happen and it could escalate into something much worse. The behavior for sure is challenging, but it's revealing. Okay, the behavior is revealing. And it's really important to avoid triggering people and overreacting to it. Being called every name in the book. Being told all sorts of awful things about you and your children and your parents. It's easy to fall, to react similarly. Making sure that you approach with caution. This is in Officer Tully video where we get a lot of feedback from police officers that she let him close the space between her and, because he was leaning in, asking for, to be spoken to more loudly. Allowing people to have their safe space, I think BJ indicates that really clearly. Jane, you may not have picked up on this directly, Jane was in the purple sweater with the long gray hair. She talked about having claustrophobia. And she has a hard time with being confined. Imagine what it would take. Can you imagine a trauma-informed way of putting her into a jail cell versus a very re-traumatizing way of putting Jane into a cell? She's not saying she's not going to go in the cell, but the way in which she is approached to go into that cell could be very re-traumatizing or it could be very trauma-informed. And so a lot of people with trauma histories have been confined, have been restrained, have been abused in places that are safe. And that's something to keep in mind, yes?
I think even just the positioning when you're meeting with somebody, so like, what's the access to the door?
Yeah.
Or how is where you're sitting, how does that
And sometimes
proceed?
that's in direct conflict with the policies of where people work.
Right.
How many people did you hear say they can't sit with their back to the door?
Yeah.
But in many agencies, that's exactly where they are. And have the window and the door covered or open, the door open, closed, all of those. And those are places, and it may vary from client to client. And is there a reason for it? Is it just the way you've always done it, or the people did it before you, and now you just carry that policy forward with you?
Well, but it's a trigger for both people, and so it makes both people hyper-vigilant,
Yeah.
and now unintentionally fearful or cautious of each other. So it doesn't set up a very helpful dynamic.
Nobody feels safe, right?
Session.
No, absolutely, and neither person feels safe. Yeah.
I was gonna say, maybe every situation is different, but maybe if your agency can afford it, maybe have an extra person in the room to provide that extra bit of safety that, where you can position yourself in a way that is not confrontational or that wouldn't be received that way, but you're also maintaining your safety, which is ultimately important.
And privacy.
Right.
And that's often the juxtaposing is the privacy versus the safety, having a private office versus having an open office. And I think it'd be really interesting, I'd be really interested in knowing how people can have resolved that, because space is a big issue. Space is a big issue, whether or not someone is a danger of hurting themselves in a jail cell, whether they're, what's in there with them, and whether they have an open front, the plexiglass front, there's all sorts of ways that the jails have tried to make it safer, but then at the same time, that's very, having someone watch you 24/7 could be very unnerving. And often people who are in suicide watch just have a gown on, no other clothes. So, it requires a lot of attention to really specific details. Certainly keeping someone safe, physically safe from harming themselves is the top priority, but in a way that would not be further re-traumatizing any more than it has to be. Jail is re-traumatizing, period. There's no way getting around that. And it comes back to communication, and what's your first name?
Bill,
What Bill mentioned in the hospital is, tell him what's gonna happen next. Use words that people understand. If someone's under stress, you hear about every other word. Words that people understand, short, calm, clear directions. If you think about, one way to think about the way the brain functions when someone's under stress is there's the lizard brain, which is that part of your brain that is back here, that is the fight or flight response, and all creatures have it. You go up to a lizard and go like this, they take off. They don't come investigate and see if you're friendly or not. The wizard brain is what we've developed over many, many millennia of evolution. That allows us to think and reason and weigh the consequences. So you want to make sure people start to engage the wizard brain more and less the lizard brain. Okay, so triggering someone just immediately invokes the fear and the flight response. Okay, so that's what you want to work. You want to work toward engaging the wizard brain, not the lizard brain.
I have a question about,
Yes.
or just a comment about that, just to avoid using jargon and, abbreviations too. I think we, as you said, we all work for agencies or places with lots of jargon, and when you say who you are, my name is Pam, I'm here to provide PFA.
Yes.
Psychological first aid training. They don't know what that means, and it's too clinical.
Oh, absolutely.
It's simple, so.
Regular words, right? Regular words. And as few as possible. First you're going to do this and then this. And after we've done that, we'll talk about what's next. Not like 1 through 12. And then you can appeal your conviction, 12 years from now that's a little bit too much information. Responding with being sensitive to the fact that people who come into contact with you, come into contact with the justice system, are fearful. Showing patience, which is often something that we're all short of. Not taking it personally, and when you can be flexible with consequences, be flexible. If you go to the most serious consequence, if someone has violated a condition of their probation, if you go to the most serious consequence, what you got left? Absolutely nothing. You have nothing left. So being flexible and building up to, and in the case of graduated consequences, knowing that, giving people a chance to do the right thing. So a trauma-informed interaction then takes into account all of these. Trustworthiness we've talked about, respect, choice, collaborating. Years ago, I was doing some research on psychiatric patients who refused medication. Their psychiatric medication. The court said you could do this as long as you're not violent. That was a number of the court decisions. And it was interesting, is most of the patients continued taking their medication, even though they knew they didn't have to, once the doctors talked to them about it and asked them, what works for you? These are the medications that you've been on, which worked best for you? Let's try that. When there was a collaboration, they didn't say, I'm not taking any of my treatment, to heck with you, I don't have to. They were willing to take it, they just wanted information. And they wanted to be a contributor to that decision. Just collaborating where you can. And ultimately that, of course, empowers people, and that's what we want to do. We don't want them to be dependent on us and the systems that we've set up for them at this point in time. We want them to be able to make those decisions themselves. One last video. This is our very last video of the training, and it's activity page 11. And just to set this up a little bit, in this case we have two people talking, Robert and Tina. Tina you've met before. Robert you've not met before. And Robert, is a little background to this, is Robert is a Vietnam veteran. And he was in combat, and he was an MP, and he was told to shoot anyone who came into the compound where he was guarding. And a man approached with what he thought was holding explosives. And so he was told to shoot. He shot, and the man was carrying a baby. And so you don't see that part here. That was, that actually was part of an older training, but I think it's important to know that about Robert. So that's what he's responding to here. And Tina, you've met already, and she talks about how a judge really, how being in court for her was a very trauma-informed experience. Okay. Let's talk about Robert first. I think Robert explains in perfect detail what made his arrest a trauma-informed arrest. It wasn't a choice of not being handcuffed. It was the way it happened. It was the way, not being hostile. And also the police officer recognizing that something was wrong with him because of his affect, because of his demeanor at the time of the arrest. That could have gone really badly for Robert and everybody, right? That could have gone any number of ways, but the one officer anyway picked up on that something was wrong and treated Robert with respect, right? And information. We're going to take you to King's Hospital, which is a psychiatric hospital downstate. I don't know if it's still open or not. And so, I mean, really focusing on that way of de-escalating the situation, which is something police officers are trained in a lot, is de-escalation. That's something that they really, most officers don't want it to go to a bad place really quickly. And that's something I think that's really important to build on in terms of the skills they already have and the training they already have, and that what may be underlying the behaviors that they're trying to de-escalate may in fact be trauma. And it may be something more than just someone that's just hostile. Anything else did you pick up on with Robert that you wanted to make note of? What about Tina? Seemed like a little thing for the judge to say, right? And it had an enormous impact on Tina. It had an enormous impact on Tina. The fact that the judge recognized that a teacher mentioned that, you know, Tina hasn't always been like this. She's in a rough patch right now. And that her mother was there, and kind of to the point we were talking about earlier, that isn't necessarily a good thing, and Tina acknowledges that. But the fact that the judge was even aware that there was support in the gallery, and you've got to build on something, right? There's got to be, everyone has social assets. Everyone has social assets. Even someone who's, as to use Tina's name, she was strung out on drugs, had social assets. Yes?
I think it's having somebody to believe in you when you don't believe in yourself, because trauma can really make you question that.
And we heard a lot about self-doubt, right? And the self-esteem takes a complete battering when people are living in a traumatic situation.
That much more powerful when it comes from such an authority.
Yeah. And many people who've gone through the justice system, or maybe this is their first time in the justice system, authority figures often haven't been particularly responsive to them. Very reactive, in fact.
And look at the long-lasting effect
Mhm.
she remembers it to this day.
Yeah. Even though she was still using at the time. Yeah.
The message, you know, the convey the message of you are someone, you are important,
You can turn it around
Turn
with
it
treatment.
around.
This isn't just a matter of your will.
Right.
yes.
This is going to take a lot of effort and a lot of people, right, to bring in the resources to be able to do that. Yes.
I think with Tina's story, you know, she recognized, she gave a lot of kudos to the judge for recognizing her support systems. But I think really the dynamic factor was the teacher showing up, right? And so, and noticing that even though I'm not the one who's making the decision, but the judge is trusting the teacher in a different way to help enlighten her to who really Tina really is, not this behavior that has brought her here, but who she is as a person. And I think that that's something that sometimes we may undermine as what power that brings and can help shift things to now where the judge is seeing Tina in a different light and saying, okay, I do believe you, or let's give you another shot, or this is the thing that has to happen, but here's the investments that we can potentially.
And she's been someone else, you know, rather than just, I think she said,
Right,
rather than
yeah.
seeing me just as those charges,
Right.
she's seeing Tina had a prior life.
Well, she also had an effect on this person who believed in her. So,
Right.
right,
The teacher.
right, yeah.
I think it's important sometimes, and when you read a lot of files about offenders and what's happened to them, is that you don't define the person just by their trauma. Because sometimes when you read what has happened to them, and
you know, if you don't control your responses, you know, you're pretty horrified, then it becomes hard for people to share what has happened to them. If they're gonna get a reaction of, oh my God, you know, I've horrified this person by my history, it's really hard for people to want to share with you.
Yeah, and I think too, it really speaks to the timing of a lot of that information and the repetition. If everyone's not working together in the justice system, the behavioral health system, for people to have to repeat the story numerous times is really, if not knowing what the others are doing can be really re-traumatizing for people. And especially if it has an impact like you're describing, they may tailor it the next time or may not divulge it at all. But knowing from across the continuum where this information is being shared and not re-soliciting it. You know, and I think that's something that where the behavioral health field can really, really help the criminal justice field with understanding that. And like you say, not reacting to it in a way that is of shock. You know, that's really why people need to talk to their colleagues, you know, to avoid that secondary trauma.
And how the information's being used. Like there's some research on trauma being used as an aggravating factor. You know, when you think about, for example, sexual abuse, and do sexual abusers or victimized, you know, become abusers. And so I think I agree that the behavioral health folks can do a good job too to inform, wait a minute, that doesn't mean it's inevitable for this to become a cycle.
And that's a real barrier
Yeah.
that public defenders and the defense bar bring up in not wanting, especially any pre-adjudication stuff. It's one thing if it's post-adjudication as part of a plea agreement or a treatment program. There's the gloves are off a little bit less, you know, there because they've already pleaded guilty to something and there is a sentence attached to that. But in pre-adjudication, like diversion programs that are really front-end diversion, like law enforcement diversion, even like pre-arraignment court diversion, there's a lot of concern about divulging information because not everybody knows that, you know, with the right interventions. I mean, this is not, that's why the cycle of violence, I want to make sure everybody really thinks about the way to present that material. This is not inevitable. We have resources. Everybody has resilience factors that can become part of their recovery and their reducing the recidivism and staying out of jail. But it's not just this, and I think that's a tough. And you know, people become very tired and disillusioned and working in this field. I mean, that burnout is really common, and people don't quit. They just don't do a very good job anymore.